This is not a professional video film, and it is not edited. It is raw material, and it should prove revealing. The clips are for your use. The more people who see them, the better. The voice you will hear is that of Bob Hillman, Chief Investigator for the Animal Protection Institute. He was there at a frozen, shattered puppy mill near Jackpot and Wells, Nevada. This is his report as he looks at the documentary record that he brought back.
Over the New Year's holiday, the temperatures in northern Nevada got down to 38 degrees below zero. Here at a puppy mill far off the main highway and away from the prying eyes of any neighbor or passerby, a puppy mill that was selling animals to pet stores throughout Nevada and other places, we think, was abandoned and animals were left to take care of themselves. Here we see a chicken coop where they were raising chickens, rabbits, cats, and dogs on this 20-acre spot out in the middle of public land. Here's a rabbit cage that had contained rabbits. Refuse was piled high in the cages. They had no water. Here's a pile of dead animals made like a compost heap where they put dead animal, layer of dead animals, a layer of straw, and then another layer of dead animals. There were puppies, kittens, chickens, rabbits, feet and tails hanging out of this pile that measured over 5 feet in diameter and 2 or 3 feet high. There were puppies on top of this pile that were just barely covered in the latest snowfall, 8 or 9 large beagle puppies, maybe 2 or 3 months of age. Then each cage, as we went through the trees, there were little puppy cages with inside and outside capability, and frozen dogs left inside where they either starved to death and then froze, or froze to death before they starved to death. It's hard to tell. Many of the dogs are in a very emaciated condition, showing that it wasn't just because of a heavy snowfall in December and that they went without food for 10 or 12 days that they died. This facility contained well over 100 animals. 66 dogs were taken out of here alive.
That dog's still alive. Once survived.
We don't know how many dead dogs we'll find in here until the snow melts this spring. It's almost anyone's guess. This little dog remained alive after the initial rescue that was conducted on December the 30th. I took it out of here 10 days later. It was surviving basically on snow that it could lick up from the outside and the body of another dog that died in the cage with it. It seemed to be glad to see someone. It was cold, it was hungry. We placed it in our truck immediately and turned the engine on so the heat would build up and it could start getting warm. It was obviously suffering from hypothermia. It was very thin. It needed a good meal, which we provided an hour or so later. Here you see some of the outside kennels with wire bottoms. The dogs that were taken out of here on the initial rescue all had bloody feet from standing on this cold wire, having their paws frozen to the wire, then having to pull free. Beneath each of the cages you'll see lots of chicken feathers. Basically they were raising chickens there for a period to feed the dogs. Here's a rabbit that in its struggle to try to get snow to drink because there was no water inside the cage, poked his head up to try to get to that snow, got caught, and as a result hung there until he froze to death. There were other rabbits in the cage with him when they were rescued on the 30th of December. Here you see each cage has some old moldy straw in the bottom. Some had water dishes, some didn't. The water dishes that you see with frozen water in them was left there by the sheriff's office, who came up the day before the rescue. Here you have dogs of mixed breed, a Boston Terrier is easily distinguishable there, all frozen the way they fell simply because of the cold and the lack of care and the lack of attention that the people who owned these dogs obviously did not give them. The kennels themselves were all homemade, plywood construction with little plywood runs, 2 to 3 feet wide, as you see, and maybe 8 or 10 feet long at the very most. Here's some little beagle puppies. Their mother was taken out of there. She survived. The puppies didn't. Almost every cage had a dead chicken in it, where they just throw in this chicken in there, and that's what they expected the dogs to eat and survive on. Here's another beagle female adult that didn't survive, and you can see the muscle tissue here on this dog. That dog didn't starve to death in 10 days. It was months. Here there was a dog tied to this chain, or chained to this tree, and the chain was wrapped all the way around the tree several times, and the dog couldn't even get to the shelter when it was finally turned loose. The area is just out in the middle of nowhere. There are several abandoned vehicles that was left there. Animals were found inside the vehicles. Here the straw, dirty straw, is piled so high inside these puppy cages that it almost blocks the door to prevent them from getting in and out. They never cleaned anything. They just piled new straw on top of old, and it just kept getting deeper and deeper. I can imagine the amount of lice and fleas and ticks, and in the summertime especially, they must have had a horrendous problem. Here's more dead chickens inside. Almost each and every dog kennel was a dead chicken. These are obviously the food source, or main food source. This is a Boston Bull Terrier. The short-haired dogs, like the Boston Bulls, almost none of them survived. The short-haired coat dogs, they just couldn't take the immense cold that was evident this winter. The ones that did survive are the 66 animals that were taken out of there, 67 with the little poodle mix that I found that day. Most of them were long-haired dogs. Dead chickens were everywhere. Dead rabbits were laying almost everywhere. Each kennel, as you can see, is just a basic homemade, pounded together with 2x4s and whatnot. Here's a kennel with a female Boston Bull Terrier. Very little straw in there for bedding. That dog didn't have a chance of surviving. Here's a box of dead rabbits, all little small baby rabbits. They were probably getting ready for the Easter trade, I would assume. The water that you see in some of these cages and water dishes is old, putrid, and frozen solid. The only structure in this whole area was that house trailer you just saw. Here's a beagle puppy, or adult female, and you can see from her rib cage, she hasn't had a decent meal in months and months. It just wasn't the last few weeks of cold weather that brought death to this dog. Here's one of the pickup trucks that was abandoned there, and in the back, inside the camper shell, they found other dogs and cats. There was junk back there, boards and straw. Almost every one of the vehicles that was laying up there disabled had an animal inside. Throughout the snow piles and throughout the kennels where the snow had drifted in, you could see the outlines of bodies of numerous dogs, breeds who knows what. Like I say, until the snow finally melts, and only then will we ever find out just how many animals really died there. These were all puppy cages here, built up off the ground with wire floors, which is probably the worst way to ever raise an animal, particularly a dog, and particularly in this cold weather where their feet can freeze to that wire, and then they pull back a bloody paw and get infected that way. Here's a little Appenfinzer dog. It's missing the lower portion of his right front leg. Whether a coyote got up there and chewed it off, or whether it froze and to the wire and he broke it off, we'll never know. Cocker Spaniel puppies. Most of the litter that was in here, 2 of these died. 2 others were found alive with their mother, where they had been able to keep warm enough to survive. Every kennel, every drift of snow seemed to have a body in or near it. And no food, no water. Any food dish that was there that had food in it was basically from the ranch hands who found this facility one afternoon on a Friday, and then they called the sheriff's office and went back up there and fed. Then they couldn't be rescued for a couple of days. This is the little puppy that we found out there and rescued, number 67, and brought him back to the nearest ranch headquarters that was about 9 or 10 miles away, and gave him a little bit of a feast there. It's probably the only food this dog has had, at least this kind of food, in weeks, if not longer. He's just been surviving on the dead chickens and the snow, licking up the snow water. This is the next day back at the boarding kennel that agreed to take all these dogs in and give them examinations and to until a temporary home could be found for them. They examined this dog and found that it was basically in good shape. It was okay. We'd gotten to it quickly enough the next day and got it warmed up, and it got over the hypothermia. It didn't seem to have any frozen toes or anything. They were going to groom it, give it a bath, and clean it up. Similar to the one that's coming out of the cage now, was one that was rescued before. And they gave it a bath and groomed it. They had to shave it almost all the way down. When they first got this dog, it had such long hair and such matted, they couldn't tell which end was which. They didn't know which end the head was on. And so now it looks a lot better than it did, but they had to shave it down. This is Saggy Maggie, a basset hound that the newspapers named basically because she obviously sags down. She's been pregnant probably every time she came into heat. She has a tumor or a cyst of some sort in her mammary glands. They were frozen and bleeding when they were found. Here they're treating an abscess that was on her back. They opened it up and filled it full of an antibiotic that will take care of that in short order. A very nice dog, a very friendly animal. I guess everyone loves basset hounds. How can you not find pleasure in a dog that looks at you with such big brown sad eyes? But take a look at her mammary glands, swollen and stretched, completely out of shape. That's not usual. That's not normal for a dog. That's simply because she has been overbred. Here we have some cocker female and tuber puppies, and one of the Boston Terrier puppies survived. How he did that is anyone's guess, but this female cocker accepted it as her own. She lost 3 or 4 of her own puppies, and she had enough milk that she would accept the Boston, and so he was back to getting breakfast and lunch and dinner again. Most of these dogs have never seen the inside of a nice kennel before, or a home. Most of them were housebroken. Most of them were very unsocialized with people, although some of them were. And that simply denotes that these people got these dogs, sometimes getting them from ads in the paper where it says free to good home. They would go get these dogs and then just use them for breeding stock, and try to get puppy after puppy after puppy, simply to sell at a pet shop for $50 or $100, and that was their business. These animals were nothing more than merchandise, something to be bought and sold, and if they lived, they lived. If they died, they died. They would get another one, and that's basically how they look at it. There's a total lack of compassion on how animals should be cared for, to let them get in the position and the condition that they were in without ever asking help of anyone, even so much that it's just unthinkable to me how people can do that to animals in this day and age. In 25 years of investigating animal welfare cases, this has got to be in the top 2 or 3 of cases that I've seen, as far as just no sense to it whatsoever of why animals got in this situation. They were purposefully out there in the middle of the Nevada desert where there's no people, simply because they knew what they had, they knew what they were doing, and they didn't want anyone else to see or to get caught in it. And that is the only reason that they were out there, where there's no water, there's no power. They were 7 miles from the nearest power line. They had no adequate shelter for the animals, whether it was summer or winter. It must have been just as unbearable there in the summertime for those animals as it was in the winter.